You know what? It's my hi and welcome to Super Anti-Aging Podcast with myself, Steve Halpern. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoy doing these podcasts. I think what we're going to talk about today is some of the really interesting nutraceuticals that I've been using. You know, I work with a wonderful health practitioner, Dr. Paulina Liss, and we're constantly sharing experiences, personal experiences, personal health experiences, and patient experiences with different nutraceuticals. And so I want to give a little context to this whole nutraceutical field, as it can be really, really super confusing. I think post-COVID, there was a growth, an explosion in this field. I think possibly also a lot of people saw that it could be a very lucrative business selling supplements to people. And so there's startups every day. I mean, I go into a health store and I see dozens and dozens and dozens of supplements, each making, different, well, you can't make medical claims, but they're telling you what it's going to do. It's going to really change your life. And, whatever you have, we got the one for you. Now, yes, supplements basically are unregulated. Delaney bill years and years ago. So only if a bad reaction is reported to the FDA will they do anything or investigate. And right now there are so many companies out there. It's impossible for the FDA to check on these companies unless somebody makes outrageous claims. Okay. So let me get into everybody's all the influencers tell you about what they take, and that's all great. And I think it comes down to your goal. What are you trying to accomplish? Well, my goal, and at least this podcast, Go Super Anti-Aging, is to help hopefully prolong longevity, but also to increase the health span. And as I've said over and over in these podcasts, a lot of health conditions are really age-related conditions. And obviously we saw it with COVID. Who were the most vulnerable during COVID? It was seniors. Well, if you look at it this way and say, well, what happens as you get older? The immune system becomes less efficient, less balanced, because it wasn't only immunity, it was also how your body was handling the virus. So let me get back to my topics now. In this field, the hottest topic right now is something called mTOR. mTOR, main target of rapamycin, and it was named after rapamycin, which was discovered in Easter Island as they were looking for hydrogen in a volcano. And they found in the soil, they found they could extract a compound that had some very interesting effects. Originally was considered as an antifungal. That's what they were using, an antifungal remedy. But then, interesting enough, they found that it could be used to suppress organ rejection for people who had transplants. But then a number of scientists have found that, at least in the animal experiments, the worms and even the mice, that it seemed to have a health-promoting effect, but not at the same dose as was used in organ transplants. Even though this is a fascinating anecdote. People who have to be on long-term rapamycin to save their life for organ rejection had much less cancer. Interesting finding. Well, if you think about it from a simplistic point of view, okay, cancer is excessive growth. And unfortunately, that's what happens as people get older. Things start to grow in places you don't want it to grow. You get excessive growth, inappropriate growth. And the theory is some of the longevity science people, I think David Sinclair, some others, think that it's a speeded up growth that is a major age factor. and you use up all the cellular reserves. So it's not the balance. One of the most amazing genius scientists who's still unrecognized was Dr. Manuel Rivisi. And he was curing cancers and doing things that now we're starting to discover. And he did this, 50, 60, 70 years ago. And he formulated an anabolic-catabolic theory, cellular functioning, that if a cell was, especially more prone to cancer or a cancer cell, there's excessive anabolic or catabolic action, too much building up, and then catabolic breaking down. Well, we understand this now, that constantly, there's a balance between building up, breaking down, building up, breaking down. When you don't have enough building up, you need some building up, you get age dysfunction. When you don't have enough catabolic action, you get cell damage, cells not cleaning itself out with autophagy, self-cleaning, and you don't go to programmed cell death, and now you've got possibility of damaged cells, which can lead to all sorts of problems, maybe senility, Alzheimer's, arteriosclerosis, on and on and on. So you want this balance between the two. Okay, so let me get back to mTOR main target of rapamycin. And I even saw an interesting anecdote that I call anecdotes, but it was a study that showed that rapamycin actually might even help prevent hair loss and maybe even graying of hair, maybe affecting stem cells. So I think talking to a practitioner, not talking to you can do it online, virtually now. I think the benefit risk, if you look at all the research on rapamycin, the benefit risk is certainly higher for the right dose of rapamycin as opposed to playing your cards. Well, maybe nothing will happen. I'll just be one of those people who can smoke and drink and do all that kind of stuff, and I'll live to 100. Okay, wonderful. Then I asked a question about these people who do live this long life. What kind of quality? Live a long life, but have a quality of life. So what happens if you don't want to do rapamycin for whatever reason? And by the way, the study is another interesting rapamycin study, a very, very pertinent right now. And it's certainly in my case, because I have a daughter and she's getting into that. What basically happened is a lot of millennium women are waiting longer and longer to have children. When I was growing up, very common for women in their 20s, that was it. But women are waiting longer and longer, and now you have the fertility issue. And so there's an interesting kind of, based on some experiments and animal studies, there are two factors here. One, they did a study on women. They did a clinical trial on women who are getting, who are thinking of, who are having difficulty having children, who are planning on getting, or we're going to get, in vitro fertilization. And basically what they found is that the women who went in this study, who were put on rapamycin, had much more success, and they didn't see any problems to the fetus or the eggs. So at Columbia Presbyterian in New York City, they're doing a clinical trial of women, putting them on 3 months of rapamycin, 5 milligrams, and they're going to measure, fertility factors, blood and whatever other tests they're going to use to see what's going to happen. So that's fascinating. That here's another offshoot use of rapamycin. Well, let me get into, there's some studies that show there are other ways to affect mTOR, and one of the interesting nutraceuticals, herbs, ashwagandha. And there's some interesting studies on ashwagandha, similar in some ways to the action of rapamycin on mTOR. Here's the difficulty right now. There is no standard blood measurement of mTOR. There's some researchers trying to work on it, so we have to guess. And we have to, no exact way of knowing. But I think adding ashwagandha. Now, the other interesting anti-aging compound is acarbose, Acarbose. I've added that personally to my regimen based on some of the longevity studies, health span studies, and it makes perfect sense. Acarbose blocks carbohydrates. And we know that this whole insulin issue, insulin resistance, and you don't have to necessarily be diabetic, but it can still have some insulin resistance. And it might not be just, now this is an interesting observation I found. We want to say, well, the insulin resistance is because you're taking lots of carbohydrates, processed food, and that's why you're getting insulin resistant, lots of sugar. Well, I've seen clients who, as they get older, they got insulin resistance, even though they had a good diet. So this is very, very important that you want to deal with that. And so there are a number of compounds. Berberine is interesting. It can be a blood sugar balancer. Bitter melon, cinnamon, the whole list. Okay. The whole list. And certainly, I share this with my clients of controlling the way carbohydrates are processed and those fluctuations of blood sugar. So I like the Acarbose, and I've definitely seen some in my client experience. I've seen even some weight loss. So that's fascinating that, you can tie them in. Because again, the tie-in is, here's what the tie-in is. The tie-in is the insulin resistance ties into more oxidative stress, and then we're back to inflammation. And inflammation seems to be a core issue in so many conditions, from cardiovascular to maybe even cancer to autoimmune diseases, and possibly even long COVID. That inflammation that was beneficial initially in COVID doesn't get turned off. And so maybe this is what we're seeing. Maybe one of the approaches, and they're looking at all sorts of approaches, they're looking at maybe as microclots possibly, and histamine, excessive all sorts of ideas, hypotheses for long COVID, but maybe it's pushed a lot of people into, and maybe there's going to be more COVID with other factors like obesity, and maybe a lot of people who are getting long COVID had pre or active insulin resistance that just got reinforced by the COVID. So it's an interesting thought. So we come to the end of this podcast. I hope I've stirred some ideas in your head and given you some valuable information. Please subscribe. I also have a Facebook group, Super Anti-Aging, where I'm going to be putting more of these short podcasts and more information. And I really want to form more and more of a community of people who really want to avoid age-related conditions, so you can have a healthy, not just long life, but a really super healthy long life. Thank you so much for listening.